Okay, so you know how sometimes in English you feel like you're stuck using the same words over and over again?
Yeah.
Like you can't quite get your point across
Yeah,
as precisely or as, powerfully as you'd like.
absolutely.
That's what we're diving into today.
Right.
It's all about boosting your English vocabulary. So that's our mission today.
Mm.
Really practical techniques you can use right away.
Yes.
We dug into a bunch of sources about learning new words, but not just learning them, like actually remembering them.
Right.
And then the big thing is actually using them, naturally in your conversations, in your writing.
Weaving them in.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So to kick things off, why don't we just address, like, why does having a broad vocabulary even matter?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think a lot of times people think, oh, vocabulary, it's kind of like a secondary concern. I got to get my grammar down. I got to, be able to understand the structure.
Get the basics.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but actually, when you really think about it for yourself, it's a huge confidence booster.
For sure.
The more words you have at your disposal, the easier it is to express yourself without having to, hesitate or settle for a word that doesn't quite fit.
It's like having all the colors to paint with, right? Instead of just,
Yeah, the primary colors.
a few. Yeah, exactly. And then what about when you're listening to native speakers? I mean, sometimes they use words and I'm like, I technically know what they're saying,
Yeah.
but I've never heard that word before.
Yeah, and that's where the whole thing about multiple meanings comes in. One word can have so many shades of meaning, and native speakers are constantly using synonyms.
Right, just to spice it up.
Yeah, to keep it dynamic, to keep it interesting. So if you have a wider vocabulary, you can really understand those subtle differences, and you're not just getting this surface level meaning.
You're getting all the nuance.
Exactly. It's like a sharper lens. You can really zoom in on the details.
So it's about understanding, but it's also about just sounding more natural yourself.
Right.
Right? Like when someone is using a variety of vocabulary, it's just more engaging to listen to.
Absolutely. I mean, imagine listening to someone who only uses like 5 adjectives.
Boring.
Yeah, exactly. It
Yeah,
would get old really fast.
Yeah.
A richer vocabulary adds texture and depth and emotion, and it just makes the whole conversation more interesting.
More captivating.
Yeah.
All right, so let's get practical here. What are some of the best techniques that our sources pointed to for actually building this amazing vocabulary?
Okay, so there are 7 key techniques that we pulled out, and I
Mhm.
think the first one is so important, and that's learning words in context.
Okay, in context, so not just like looking at a list of words.
Exactly, because if you try to learn a word in isolation, it's like trying to understand how a tool works without ever seeing it used.
Oh, that's a good analogy.
When you see a word in a sentence or a paragraph, you get all these clues, what role it plays, what kind of situations it's used in.
Right.
So, the example that they gave was learning the word delighted in the sentence. I was delighted to hear the good news.
I was delighted.
Exactly. And suddenly you understand, okay, it's a positive emotion. It's used to express happiness.
You get the feeling of it.
Yeah. And a really good tip was, actively engage with written English. So whether that's stories, articles, blog posts, whatever you're reading,
Yeah.
highlight those phrases where you encounter new words. So you're not just writing down the word itself, you're seeing it in action.
Okay, so that's something you can do like right away next time you're reading something.
Yeah.
All right, this next technique is all about immediate use. So you learn a new word, try to use it like as soon as possible. Why is that so important?
Because when you actually use a word, it helps solidify it in your memory. It's the difference between just recognizing a word and being able to actively recall it and use it yourself.
It's like putting it into practice.
Exactly. And one source even suggested this fun challenge. Try to use that new word at least 3 times in one day.
Oh, I like that.
So it forces you to really think about it and how you can integrate it into your speaking or writing.
It's like a little game. Okay, so moving on. We have learning synonyms and related words. So this seems like a good way to not only expand your vocabulary, but also just like deepen your understanding.
Yeah, I love this one because when you start exploring synonyms, you realize that words that seem similar on the surface actually have these subtle shades of meaning.
Right, they're not exactly the same.
Exactly. So for example, if you're learning the word happy, right?
Happy?
You could also learn words like joyful, thrilled, over the moon.
Over the mood.
And suddenly you have this whole spectrum of ways to express different kinds of happiness.
Right.
It's about being precise with your language.
Yeah, and the tip here was to use a thesaurus. And they specifically mentioned online resources like Power Thesaurus or Word Hippo.
Oh, yeah, those are great. You can really go down a rabbit hole with those.
You can spend hours on those.
But it's so interesting. You discover all these words that you might not have thought of otherwise.
Right, it gives you options.
Yeah.
All right, this next technique is a little more hands-on. It's about labeling objects.
Okay, this one might seem a bit silly, but it's actually very effective.
Okay, so how does it work?
So basically, you take sticky notes and you write the English word on them, and then you stick them on objects around your house.
So like, refrigerator on the fridge.
Exactly, or lamp on the lamp window on the window.
So you're constantly seeing these words.
Yeah, and it creates these visual associations.
Yeah.
You're immersing yourself in the language, even in your own home.
That's a good point because we're always surrounded by these objects,
Mm.
but we don't necessarily think about their names in English.
Right, and the key here is to change the labels regularly. So maybe like once a week, switch them up so you're constantly learning new words.
Keep it fresh.
Exactly.
All right, the next technique is something we probably all do to some extent, which is listening and reading in English. But there's a difference between just kind of passively absorbing it and being really active with it, right?
Yeah, passive listening and reading is good. That exposes you to the language. But if you want to actively grow your vocabulary, you need to be more engaged.
Okay, how do you do that?
So when you're listening to a podcast or watching a movie or reading a book, pay attention to words you don't recognize.
Right.
And instead of immediately looking them up, try to guess the meaning from context.
Use the cleaves around it.
Exactly. And then,
Yeah.
if you're still not sure, then look it up. But that process of trying to figure it out yourself really strengthens your understanding.
I see. So you're not just memorizing the definition, you're actually understanding how it's used.
Right.
Okay, next up we have mnemonics and word associations. This sounds kind of fun.
This is all about making vocabulary learning more playful and memorable.
Okay.
So mnemonics are basically memory aids, and one way to use them is to connect a new word to something you already know.
Create a link.
Yeah, so the example they gave was connecting the word bizarre to the word bazaar and imagining like a really strange and unusual market.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah, and it just makes the word stick in your mind more easily.
It's more vivid.
Yeah, and they also suggested making up your own stories using the new vocabulary.
Oh, so you're really like embedding it in your mind.
Exactly. The more creative and outlandish the story, the better.
The more you'll remember it.
Yeah.
And finally, we have word games and vocabulary apps, which there's so many of these days.
Well, yeah, technology has given us so many tools. Apps like Anki Quizlet Memrise.
Yeah, I've used
They
them.
use these really clever algorithms to help you memorize words efficiently.
Spaced repetition.
Exactly. And then you have the classic word games like crossword puzzles, Scrabble.
Those are good.
Yeah, and one source even suggested setting a goal of learning like 5 new words a week through games.
That's a good idea. Make it fun.
Yeah.
Okay, so to kind of put all this into practice, one of our sources had this quick vocabulary challenge.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm going to give you a word,
Mm-hmm.
and I want you to either think of a synonym or just a more interesting way to use that word in a sentence.
Okay, I'm ready.
All right, so the first word is exciting.
Ooh, okay. So instead of just saying the movie was exciting, I could say the movie was absolutely thrilling.
Ooh, I like that. Thrilling.
Or the energy in the stadium was electrifying.
Ooh, nice. Okay, what about the word difficult?
Difficult. So instead of saying the task was difficult, I could say completing the project proved to be quite arduous.
Arduous, good one. Okay, now for beautiful, let's try to be a little more sophisticated here.
Let's see, instead of the sunset was beautiful, I could say the sunset painted the sky with radiant hues of orange and pink.
Wow, that's poetic. All right, two more. Let's do fast.
Fast. Okay, so instead of the train was fast, I could say the cheetah moved with astonishing swiftness.
Ooh, swiftness. I like that one more. Interesting.
Interesting. So instead of the lecture was interesting, I could say the speaker's insights were thought-provoking and truly captivating.
Captivating. Excellent. So that's exactly the kind of wordplay that our source is encouraging us to do, just to kind of stretch those vocabulary muscles.
Yeah, and make those less common words more accessible.
Right. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I think the takeaway is that expanding your vocabulary is really crucial for becoming a more confident and effective communicator.
Absolutely. And it's not just about sounding impressive. It's about being able to express yourself clearly and connect with others on a deeper level.
And the great thing is all these techniques we talked about, they're actually doable. You can start using them today.
Yeah, and even if you just pick one or two and stick with them, you'll start to notice a difference.
For sure. So here's a final thought for you to consider. How do you think a broader vocabulary would change the way you communicate and connect with people in English?
That's a good one.
Think about the conversations you have, the ideas you want to share, would you be able to express yourself more fully or understand others more deeply?
Yeah.
Give it a try. Experiment with some of these techniques and see what happens.
See what doors open.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right. That's it for this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.
See ya.